About 3 weeks ago, my wife and I were on an airplane and we were flying out to the Pacific Northwest to see our kid who is in college there. And usually I fall asleep in about 3 seconds when I'm on a plane, but this time I wasn't. I was awake, and it's a pretty long flight from the Midwest to Seattle. Especially if you're headed east to west, it's about 5 hours, give or take. And so I'm awake and we're flying, and I'm just finding ways to keep busy, and I'm doing a Sudoku and I'm listening to a podcast. And I don't usually get the Wi-Fi on the plane because I like the idea of being disconnected. So I'm not really doing anything with cards except for the podcast. I'm usually listening to a cards podcast or something else. And I'm not sure exactly where we were on the journey. I forget where. Might have been somewhere over Idaho, perhaps, or I don't think we were that far yet, maybe one of the Dakotas. And we had some turbulence. Typically, this doesn't bother me a whole lot, or really at all. My dad and my brother both have their private pilot's license, which of course means I obviously would choose not to do that. But I was around flying constantly as a kid, so things tend not to bother me or disturb me. Just kind of roll with it. I know it's no big deal. It's safe. But this turbulence was different. It was pretty violent. And my least favorite kind of rides at amusement parks are the ones where you feel like you're coming out of your seat a little bit, like you're no longer attached to your seat, and there's a shift in gravity. I don't mind roller coasters. And the faster, the better. I think those are fun. Love all the water rides, but the ones that will rock back and forth so that you get up to a higher spot where gravity takes you off the seat and it feels like you're going to fall. I don't like that. And that's what was happening with this turbulence. It was going up and down. And at one point, it felt like we were banking. And if you've ever flown into Midway Airport in Chicago, you know that you bank and you bank and you bank at just these crazy angles that I know are safe, but it's just a very peculiar sensation when you fly into Midway. And we hit such a bad spot that the plane tilted a couple of degrees, almost like we were starting to bank, and then dropped what felt like maybe, I don't know, 8 to 10 feet, like really hard. And people let out screams and shrieks, and my heart started racing just a little bit. It was terrifying. I never felt anything like that on an airplane. And for the first time ever on an airplane, I felt like there was a greater than 0% chance that we were going to go down. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, 4 seconds, and there were a few aftershocks. But it was just absolutely crazy. We were flying at about 34,000 feet. My wife had grabbed my hand and was digging her ring into the finger. It hurt, but I totally understood. And hey, that's what I'm here for, right? And I was probably grabbing her just as hard as she was grabbing me. And when it settled, we all looked at each other, not just my wife and me, but other passengers. Like, geez, that was absolutely terrifying. And they put on the little signal saying, everyone sit down, of course. And then the pilot gets on and says, flight attendants, get in your seats as well. So we hit some patch of something. I don't know what. But we got through it after a couple of minutes. And we started to climb. It was on United Airlines. And there's this thing in the seat backs in front of you where you can track where your plane is, and you can also track the altitude. And we started to climb, and we climbed from 34,000 feet to 36,000 feet. And once we hit 36,000, things were pretty calm for the rest of the flight. But it was weird. I started taking inventory. I'd never really considered death before, ever, like literally ever, on an airplane or a boat or a ship or anything, really. And I thought about the kids what it would be like for them, because it was just my wife and me on the plane, and they weren't on the plane, thankfully. And then the next thing that I started thinking about is, have I wasted all this time on sports cards? Because if something would have happened, they would have been there in the house. And is it a waste? And was this a, coming to the light moment about what's really important? As I sit here today recording this episode, I'm here to tell you that that was not the reaction that I had. The reaction that I had was, I really like card collecting, and I'm going to keep doing it. And that surprised me a little bit, because what you always hear is like these stories of, now I know what really matters. Well, I think what really matters to me, once I'm, my family, of course, my dogs, our home, our sports cards. I love sports cards. I have friends in sports cards. I have sports cards in sports cards. I love sports cards. And I think it really means something. I think it really meant something that I didn't think about my job. I didn't think about my career. I thought about cards. This was after thinking about family, but my mind switched to cards. And I really do enjoy being in this hobby. It's given me something to do outside of family and professional obligations. It's helped me think about who I am, not just as a collector, but why I collect the things that I collect, which helps me in turn learn about myself. And so that's what this episode is going to do today. I'm using this episode to figure out why this hobby space means so much and why it popped into my head after such a harrowing experience on a plane, and why it encouraged me to, I won't say double down on it, but just to keep going, to go the opposite direction of everything that you hear of. I'm going to refocus on just my family and my faith and my career. No, I want more cards. I want to keep collecting. I want to keep meeting people, most of all, in the hobby, and learning more about myself and learning more about other people, and learning about the history of the cards and learning about how the cards fit together and what pairs well, what looks cool, what has a good story, what doesn't, what's worth my time and what isn't. I really, really enjoy sports cards. And I think that's okay. I don't think there's anything wrong with this reaction. And I think that most of you would not see anything wrong with this reaction. Now, if I would have said the first thing I thought of was my 1983 Topps Traded, whatever player, that would have been strange. No, I thought of my family first. I thought about how horrible it would be on our kids and whatever. But then, I thought about the cards. Am I going to reach an answer today in front of this microphone about why they're so important to me? Probably not. That seems like a heavier conversation. That seems like a heavier thought process. That seems like a longer thought process. But what does stand out is that the cards were there in my head in some spot. So where am I right now in this hobby? That's an important question. We all move and sway and go to different places in this hobby. Sometimes we are in collecting mode. Sometimes we are in spots where we just don't even want to think about the cards. Sometimes we are revising and reconstructing our collections. We're rethinking who we are and why we're collecting certain things. At one point, something might mean something to us, and the next point, it might not. And I think the more experienced we get in this hobby, the more we realize that we hop around quite a bit, and that transition and transformation is as much a part of the hobby as release dates and card shows. I don't know many people, although I know some, and they're out there, who never change, who have been trying to collect the same lane now for years or decades. And what I'm reminded of when I say that, I teach college, and when we're talking to freshmen, we don't say to them, "What do you want to be?" We say to them, "What do you like to do?" And I promise I will come around to my point on this. I'm getting there, I promise. A couple years ago, I had a student named Joe come into my office, and he was a math education major. He wanted to be a math teacher. And he sits down in the chair in my office, and he's looking nervous, anxious, a little bit uncomfortable. And he asked me a question. He actually says, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Yeah, of course. What?" And he said, "Am I a bad person that I hate kids?" And I said, "No, like, what do you mean?" And what he was getting around to was that he realized he did not want to be a math teacher. He loved numbers. But the more he was thinking about becoming a teacher, the more he was around kids, the less he wanted to be around them. And the more that he was realizing he was in the wrong major. We talked and he felt better. And he switched to accounting, I think, because when we asked the question of what do you want to be, he felt stuck. He felt bad that he wanted to change. When we changed the conversation, when we pivoted to a different point of view, to his, what do you like? What do you like to do? And he was numbers. He says he still likes numbers. He realized he could still have the kind of career that he wants, working with numbers, working in something he's good at, but he was no longer trapped in his old self. What does this mean? What it means is this stat that we tell our freshmen as they're thinking about our majors. College students who don't know what they want to do when they get to college, who come in undeclared, or students who come in and think they know what they want to do and realize they don't, and then switch to a different major, graduate at a significantly higher clip than those who come in with a certain major and don't switch. So put another way is students who come in not knowing what they want to do and exploring a little bit, they are more successful in college than students who come in knowing exactly what they want to do and are too stubborn or too set in their ways to try something different. Why is that? It's because the other students, the ones who are exploring a little bit, who are dropping a class or maybe changing the majors, they're figuring out what they want. They are following their interests. On the other side, the students who come in knowing exactly what they want to do, but then feel like they, don't want to do that anymore. They feel trapped. They feel as if they have been telling everyone who they are. I'm going to be a teacher. I'm going to be an accountant. I'm going to be an actor. I'm going to be whatever. They are too stuck. And they're stuck because, well, I've told everybody this is what I'm going to do, so I have to stay with it. I have to have my plan. I cannot deviate from my plan. And they get miserable to the point that they lose motivation or that they just don't want to be there anymore. And so their reaction is to flee. And so they leave college. And this isn't everyone. The difference in percentages is, give or take 4, 5, 6%, but that is significant. So let's put this back onto the card hobby. Imagine if you couldn't change. Imagine if you were in your collecting lane and you wanted to explore something different and you couldn't. Or even worse, you wouldn't. You had the power to change. You had the power to explore. You had the power to branch out into something new, but you just didn't do it. Wouldn't you feel a little trapped too? I know I would. And so as we climbed from 34 to 36,000 feet, and the air smoothed out and the flight smoothed out, and our heart rates started to come down a little bit, I was thinking about my collection. And I didn't come to any major conclusions. I didn't think it's time to pivot from baseball to collecting soccer or football or basketball or anything else. But what I did think is I really like my collection. I like that I dabble in different things. I like that I have a lot of St. Louis Cardinals cards and sometimes some obscure ones and sometimes some fun ones. I like that I don't have a lot of slabs, but the slabs that I have are focused and meaningful, whether it's Jackie Robinson, Shohei Ohtani, Albert Pujols, Caitlin Clark. To be able to look in different areas and to take this hobby for what it is, which is a hobby without any real rules, is really one of the best things about this hobby, is that you can create your own rules. You can write your own story. And as you're writing the story, there's an eraser on it. You can get rid of certain things, or you can pretend you don't have an eraser and just pivot. You can write a transition and move on to something different. And you can look back on what you used to collect, and you can be happy with what you used to have, or realize you don't really like that anymore. You can regret that you sold things too early, or you can be proud that you held on to things until just the right moment. You can look back and you can see stories in your collecting. There's just no real rules. And if I had to stop doing that all of a sudden, let's say there was some rule that after you went through some really bad, scary turbulence, you had to give up your hobby. I don't know where I'm even headed with this. I would just be so incredibly bummed because sports cards make my life better. They make my life more interesting. They make my life, I don't know what the word would be, it's more fun. I feel like I think more creatively when I think about sports cards than I do in other parts of my life. You know, to reorganize and organize and reorganize and organize and to be in charge of something. I don't see it. I don't see collecting as, well, I see collecting as part of an identity, but I don't see what we collect as part of our identity. I think that's a really dangerous place to go. I don't want to go that way today to talk about what happens when people are too wrapped up on their own collections. But I think just the act of being a collector certainly brings with it certain characteristics, certain things that we all share and hold and can bond together with. I think we've all felt that desperation when a card that you need finally comes up, and we know what it means to our collection, and we know also that 99.9% of the people around us are not going to care the way we care, are not going to even want to understand why to care. And so we have to find other ways to find fulfillment, which is through community or just the self-satisfaction of having built something really interesting or being in the process of building something and knowing that you are taking your collection in a direction that nobody else on this planet potentially has ever done before. So, yeah, I love this hobby. And I don't think that love is too strong of a word. It is just such a wonderful part of my life, so long as it's kept in check, as long as it's kept in its right place, that you don't spend too much, that you don't think about it too much, but that you think about it enough. And for all of us, those are different degrees, different barometers, different amounts that help us feel satisfied without going into obsession. I'm not going to claim to know what that point is for anybody. I'm not even sure if I know what that point is for myself, but I like trying. I like trying to find out. My name is Dave, by the way, Dave Schwartz. You are listening to The Shallow End, and this is my podcast about sports cards. It's my podcast about collecting within your means, whatever those means might be, and it's about collecting for yourself and finding your own reasons. I'm not even sure I know what my reasons are, but I know that there are reasons, and figuring out what those reasons are is part of the journey of collecting. So thank you for tuning in to this episode. I know that we are all swamped. We all have so many busy things going on in our lives. And so the fact that you share a few minutes with me to talk about sports cards means a lot. So until next time, take care, and I'll talk with you again soon.